What's going on YouTube? I was thinking what an idea of my first video or my second video would be. What was your first car? And what did your first car teach you? If it made the decision for you to buy a certain car after that car because of something that happened. My first car was a 1997 Volkswagen Jetta Jazz. It had a 6-disc CD changer. That's the only thing I saw different. Reading online, I guess I had a few different things accessory wise, but I didn't really notice anything else. It was kind of like a regular Jetta to me. It had 115 horsepower, the 2-liter engine. I bought it for $1,700. Saved that money working at my first job. What made me buy it was a friend that's like my brother. Shout out to Curtis. He, when I got my permit, when I was 14 or 15, I was 15 when I got my permit. He took me around his '08 Scion TC, and that one was a manual or standard transmission. And I was like, wow, like this is what it is to drive a standard transmission. I was like, man, for my first car, I want to buy a manual transmission. Funny enough, I don't remember if at the time he sold that Scion TC, but he bought a '94 Jetta, and I was like, man, this is a nice car. Like for my first car, I want something like this. And then we looked it up and we found another one. It was the black one. And I was like, man, how funny would it be if we had the same car? I ended up buying it, and for a while we were both driving. He was driving the blue one, I was driving the black one. And I don't remember how long he had his, but while we were driving, a few things came about. I drove the car for 3.5 years. We bought it from an older gentleman. He said that his son had been on military active duty. It was his car, and he asked his son, can I sell it since you're not gonna come back? It's been sitting for a while. So when he said it was sitting for a while, I don't know how many years, I don't remember, but I just know that it was kind of in a little swamp, and the whole underneath of the car was rusted, and the rest of the car was fine. It was just the underneath. And the first time I got a flat tire, I remember trying to jack the car up on the jacking pad. I just remember trying to jack it up, and then it just like blew a hole through the frame. And I was like, what in the world? Like, that's how bad this rust is. Another time, there was one single ignition coil that was mounted on the firewall, and I remember somebody had put some clear silicone on it, I think to prevent from water getting on it. The car wasn't starting one day, and found out that the distributor cap was a little bit corroded, so the contacts were making that connection when the rotor was spinning. I think I got a new distributor cap, and I don't think that fixed it. I think it ended up being the ignition coil was cracked, and then every time it rained, that's what it was. Every time it rained, the car wouldn't start, or if I went through a car wash, the car wouldn't start. So I was like, okay, like, this is crazy. Like, me being young, 15 years old, like I'm not really understanding like ignition, any of that stuff in cars. So I had my brother, he was like, okay, yeah. He understood. He was telling me, for a car you need ignition, compression, fuel, air. He was explaining it all to me, just the basics, how a vehicle works. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Okay, it makes sense. Placed that ignition coil, and then it started right up. It was just moisture getting in the ignition. It wasn't providing any ignition to the spark plugs. I changed the ignition wires, the distributor cap, ignition coil, everything. Then now it was working again. We had to change the starter, I think maybe like a year later. I didn't want to start again, and something had shorts between the starter solenoid and the ignition switch, and I wish I knew, like, wish I could troubleshoot it now, what exactly that was. I took it to this mechanic because I couldn't figure it out, and he ended up running like a jumper wire from the ignition to the starter. I don't know if it was just like a hot whatever, jumping something, I don't know what he did, but that's how I ended up using the car for the rest of the time, which was that whatever jumper he installed, or whatever. Maybe he found a wire that was shorted and then he just replaced that wire. I'm not sure what he did. Another time that the car didn't want to start, engine was running lean, I think, and then I'm just thinking, I'm starting to do research now, kind of understanding cars now, a few years into fixing this car, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's a 97, maybe the fuel filter hasn't been changed. So I think I changed the fuel filter. Let me change the fuel pump. So I remember pulling the fuel pump, putting a new, I guess an aftermarket fuel pump in. After that, it starts to hear a rattle in the catalytic converter. And then I, go to Curtis. I'm like, man, like, why is it rattle every time? Like, I can hear that idle. I can hear it sometimes, like something moving around in there. So he tells me, let's straight pipe it, whatever. So we end up cutting the exhaust. We just looked down the hole, and I remember seeing like this welded honeycomb, and I'm just like, what? Like, I look up like what a catalytic converter is supposed to look like. It's supposed to have that honeycomb, a large honeycomb section. And I'm just like, how did this even happen? And I'm thinking, man, that car was running lean or running rich for such a long time that somehow this honeycomb inside the catalytic converter broke down. It kind of just welded itself into this ball. So I think we ended up just like installing some type of steel pipe there and with some clamps or whatever. And, that was that. Y'all are gonna laugh at me for this, but throughout this whole time of these stories that I've been saying, I was always adding a little bit of coolant to my car. Now understanding that it might have been a head gasket leak, that it was just burning into the cylinders or something, but I don't remember ever having external leak. But the car, I mean, it ran fine. I don't know. It wasn't really like a rough idle. I didn't have a misfire. Either way, the car was drinking coolant. I don't know how, but it was drinking coolant. So one day, I was driving home from work, and 1 or 2 minutes in, like this really loud alarm comes on, and I'm like, what kind of alarm is that? I'm like, I've never heard, the whole time I've had this car now, almost 4 years, I've never heard that it had any type of chimes or any type of signals. So I just start to hear this like bam, 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 bam. I'm like, what in the world? And I look down and I see the oil pressure, or the oil quantity or oil pressure light, and I'm like, oh my, like, I think it was oil quantity. So then I'm like, I just pull over to a outdoor parking area, pull in there, and then across the street is a bus stop. Just jump out of the car, and I look underneath the car, and I see a big puddle of oil. And I was like, oh my goodness, like this thing is just spraying oil. Like what's going on? So then I think I call my dad. I'm like, hey Dad, my car started leaking oil really bad. I don't know what's going on. Just bring a gallon of oil. And I said, it's just a straight shot to the house from here, just down one road. I said, I'm just gonna risk it. I'm like, I'm not gonna pay a tow truck. I don't have money for that. So I just filled it up with oil and then just drove it down. All the lights were green, and then I like turned the car off and coasted into the parking spot at my parents' house at the time when I was staying with them. I checked the dipstick, and then it's like no oil. I'm like, okay, I'll deal with this tomorrow. So the next day, I'm doing research online, and I'm reading forums, and I'm like, hey, this has happened before. It was leaking oil from the oil filter housing, and people are saying that you can't find this O-ring anymore. But if you buy an oil filter for this car, the oil filter O-ring, and pull out the oil cooler housing and put that oil filter O-ring in there. And I was like, man, like can I really do that? So it's worth a shot. So I went to buy an oil filter, pulled that O-ring off because they're saying it's the same size, pulled the oil filter housing off. Sure enough, it was the same. The O-ring had failed. It was probably over 20 years old, whatever, at the time. Once I put that on, added oil. I think at the time I even changed the oil pressure sensor just to be safe while I was there. And I was like, wow, that was it. I can't believe I actually fixed this car, and then I didn't have any issues. I mean, it ran out of oil that one time, but I think I got it home in time before it was just running on nothing. That was a funny story. But shortly after that, the car started turning off again on its own. And I wish I knew what it was now, but it just kept turning off, like when you came to a light. Turn it back on and then it would go again. But posted it on Facebook Marketplace, told the guy what was going on. The guy that bought it from me said, look man, he's like, I don't care. He's like, I just need a car right now. Like, it is what it is. I like that it's manual. He's like, I just need a car. He gave me $1,000. I said, awesome. Now that I can help me buy my next car. My next car ended up being a 2004 Subaru Outback. That first car of mine, 97 Jetta, inspired me to buy the 05 Beetle. Both manual transmission, both color black, both older cars, except for the Beetle is a 1.8 turbo. So when I saw that, I was like, this is basically the same car, just that this one has a turbo. This one's a two-door hatch. The other one was a 4-door sedan, but you know, it's still the same Volkswagen car. I was like, okay, Mark III one's a Mark IV. I'm like, this is the closest I can get. So that's what kind of inspired me to buy the 2005 Beetle and make it a project and fix the blown head gasket that I purchased it with. Now I have a good summer car. So that's the story of my first car. Peace out. I hope you guys like this video. Please subscribe to my channel, share my video. Now that I think about it, that car was a piece of shit. Heck no, man. That car was terrible.